Welcome to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm Dr. Kristin, an integrative holistic family physician, author of Life After Lyme, and host in this virtual space of learning, healing, and growing. I believe humans are like trees, and our physical limb is only one of many. Health on all limbs of the tree, emotional, conceptual, social, spiritual, is absolutely required for the whole tree that is you to be vibrantly well. I created the Healing Grove podcast as a place to showcase some of the world's best integrative and holistic medicine, to expose you to transformative tools and mindset shifts for all limbs of your tree. I hope you enjoy our conversation in the Healing Grove today as much as I enjoyed having it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Healing Grove podcast. I am delighted to introduce this week's guest, who all of you probably are ready for because you all had homework assignments regarding our conversation today. So my guest today is Dr. Heather Sandison. She's a renowned naturopathic doctor specializing in neurocognitive medicine. She's the founder of Solcere Health Clinic based in San Diego, which is a clinic dedicated to brain optimization, including dementia prevention and, wait for it, dementia recovery. She also founded Marama, which is a residential facility and program that helps residents suffering from dementia to recover lost abilities and return to independence. In other words, she's totally changing the dementia paradigm, one patient at a time. Dr. Sandison is also the New York Times bestselling author of Reversing Alzheimer's, the new toolkit to improve cognition and protect brain health, which I highly, highly recommend. And that's actually how I came to find out about your work was we're in a mentorship program together and I saw your celebration that you'd published that. And so good job. It's really, really a game changer. In addition to writing this book for the layperson who's either caring for a loved one with dementia or concerned about their own cognitive function, she's also published in the peer-reviewed medical literature, most recently a paper on describing patient successes at her outpatient clinic, Solcere, in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. So basically, she's shattering common misconceptions about Alzheimer's by publishing, coaching, doctoring, writing, and teaching about lifestyle protocols that keep your brain sharp at any age and reverse cognitive decline. So for so many reasons, I'm delighted to have you here. Thanks so much for being here. Not the least of which is that, as I told you a minute ago, I suffered a brain injury myself a couple years ago during an elective surgery and am ever more deeply committed to brain optimization than I've been in the past. So I also know there's many people in my community who've suffered from Lyme and have brain fog, even maybe still. And this community of wellness seekers who've experienced brains not functioning optimally cannot wait to hear what you have to say. So with that, I would like to invite you to give us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up on this path, shattering paradigms.
Really, I think it was my ego, if I'm honest, that drove me in this direction because probably like you, I was told throughout my training that there was nothing you could do for someone suffering with Alzheimer's. And so to me, it was just this thing like, okay, that is the hardest. Neurologists must be the smartest. Like anybody that takes that on, they must, know something I don't. They must just be like at the upper echelon of intelligence. And yet they weren't finding much that you could do, right? We were told this over and over again. Don't tell anyone that you can treat their Alzheimer's. Don't suggest that you can help them. That would be to give them false hope. Well, I've come completely full circle on that. I now think that treating dementia and Alzheimer's, it's common sense. It's just good, plain common sense, just uncommon practice. It is not rocket surgery. And not only that, not only should we not be intimidated by sort of the intellect that's required for this, but also to suggest there's nothing you can do for Alzheimer's is to promote false hopelessness. That is it's not factually accurate anymore that there's nothing you can do for dementia or Alzheimer's. There's a huge amount that we can do. And what I'm excited to get into with you is like, okay, how do we structure this, right? Because it can almost become overwhelming. It's like, okay, one person's saying this, somebody else is saying exercise, someone's saying infections, maybe there's Lyme history, maybe there's genetic history. How do we organize ourselves so it doesn't feel daunting, but feels really doable?
Yeah, I love that. So before we do that, I think it would make sense to kind of define dementia for people, because I think a lot of people categorize it in, different places, like Lyme brain is one thing and Alzheimer's is another thing. And, dementia-ish, mild cognitive decline after a concussion, another thing. How do you think about all these things on the spectrum?
Yeah, so dementia is age-related memory decline. And there's a bunch of different types of dementia. And, you and I were chatting, our philosophy is we don't care as much about what we call it in the end, like what the ICD-10 code is and the diagnosis, the way like they really prioritize that at Mayo, for example. What we care about is, why do you have it? So dementia is an umbrella term, and then we get these fancy diagnoses underneath that are included in different types of dementia, right? So Alzheimer's dementia is the most common form of dementia, and it's associated with the neurofibrillary tangles and the amyloid plaques, these misfolded proteins that change the structure of the brain. And essentially, those misfolded proteins are happening in response to a trigger. And there's some genetic predisposition that's part of that as well, but we'll get into all of that. But Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia, and it's associated with these misfolded proteins. Now, we also have vascular dementia, which is associated with strokes, of course, and basically blood supply to the brain. Are there things inhibiting that? Are there things preventing good blood supply? And then we have things like frontotemporal dementia, where it's affecting a certain type or a certain part of the brain, excuse me, and we get certain basically it comes with a lot of paranoia, sometimes hallucinations. There's much more of a behavioral pattern with that. We also know that there's posterior cortical atrophy, there's Lewy body dementia. This is what Robin Williams had. So dementia is the umbrella term. And then we get these different sort of pathophysiological changes that help us define the different and different characteristics associated with each of these different types of dementia. Now, Lyme, when I think about I essentially think about 6 components of brain health, and Lyme fits into one of those. So let's just go through them to organize ourselves. And I'm even going to take one more step back, right? So conventional perspective, dementia is the umbrella term. Then we have these different types of dementias under that umbrella. Now, when we, functional medicine, when we come to a complex chronic disease, what we're looking for is, where's the imbalance? Where is the imbalance that's driving cellular degeneration? Where is the too much? Where is the too little? What's in the right place? What's in the wrong place? What's happening at the wrong time? And then how do we try to get that cell or that organ back into homeodynamic balance by identifying these imbalances? So these 6 components of brain health, that's where they fit in. So we're looking to create balance in these 6 different areas. 1, toxins. We need to make sure that those toxins, for the most part, are getting out of the body, and are they accumulating in the wrong place at the wrong time? Are we able to move them out of our organs of elimination? Nutrients. Do we have enough, right? Do we have enough B12 to keep our homocysteine down and to keep our detox pathways firing and to keep our neurotransmitters in balance? Do we have too much sugar? That we're creating glycotoxicity? We're creating diabetes. Sometimes you'll hear Alzheimer's called type 3 diabetes because of the glycation and the insulin resistance that basically prevent our brain from getting enough fuel, and also can lead directly to neurodegeneration. So toxins, nutrients, stressors, we need enough and we don't want too much, right? Stress can go in both directions. We need purpose and meaning and interaction and engagement with others. We also don't want to be sleep deprived. We want to have enough engagement, but not feel burdened. And caregiving comes up in this. And then, so toxins, nutrients, stressors, structure. You mentioned a traumatic brain injury. If we get hit over the head with a baseball bat, that will create inflammation that can lead to neurodegeneration. Also, sleep apnea, obstructive sleep apnea that can cut off our airway at night. This can lead to hypoxia that can lead to essentially it's mild brain damage. Structural issues, including genetic predisposition, right? Our molecular structure. If we have molecular structure set up so that we're predisposed to create those amyloid plaques or those tau proteins more easily than our neighbor or our spouse who we're not genetically related to, we want to keep that structural issue in mind too, or that structural potential in mind as well. But even just the stress of chronic pain, right? Is my hip bone connected to my leg bone in a way that doesn't create a bunch of sciatica or create some chronic pain syndrome where I'm under constant stress or I can't get that exercise that's so beneficial? So again, toxins, nutrients, stressors, structure, infections. And I think this is what many of the people in your community will relate to, is when I have an infection that can get in, it can cross that blood-brain barrier, it can directly and dramatically change my cognitive function. Now, when I start piling these things on top of each other, maybe I have a Lyme infection that I feel like is the predominant issue, but I've also got genetic predisposition towards dementia, and maybe I have a history of a traumatic brain injury. and maybe I'm not able to exercise because I'm in chronic pain or I've been chronically fatigued. Now, all of a sudden, we have this milieu of multiple whys that could all lead to neurodegeneration. So Lyme is one of the infections that we found in the amyloid plaques, right? So those amyloid plaques, they develop because they're there in an attempt to help us, to protect us. And so we in autopsies of people with Alzheimer's, they have found Lyme spirochetes. They've also found P. gingivalis, which is associated with gingivitis, and herpes simplex 1 in particular is also associated with dementia and Alzheimer's. COVID as well is another one. H. pylori, basically, if you put into PubMed this bacteria or this virus and Alzheimer's, there are often connections between them because, again, our brain is going to trigger this response, this inflammatory response that sometimes ends up looking like misfolded proteins. It depends where these proteins are cleaved, but we can generate these misfolded proteins in an effort to protect the brain from these infections. So toxins, nutrients, stressors, structure, infections, and signaling. Signaling is this idea that, when we are in this fight and defend mode, we're getting very different signals to our brain, basically to shrink, to protect, to withdraw, versus when we're in that regenerative mode, right? When we're getting these signals to create new neurons and new connections between them. Some of those signaling hormones include vitamin D, thyroid hormone, but also the sex hormones, testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, pregnenolone, DHEA, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which comes from muscle, but also there are different plant compounds we can use that increase BDNF. So there's a lot that we can kind of think through in terms of how do we shift the signaling from that inflamed, like protection mode towards that regenerative mode. So again, just to recap really fast, these 6 components of brain health are toxins, nutrients, stressors, structure, infections, and signaling. And we can dive into any of those however you see fit.
Awesome. Well, I think I want to start first with talking about the Lyme piece because that is really relevant to a lot of my people. And your book is really helpful in understanding the sort of history of amyloid plaque focus and all the sort of misguided information that led to the development of the current drugs we have, which you point out are not actually helpful at reversing any of the cognitive decline. Might be helpful at slowing the decline and prolonging the inevitable, but don't actually get people well and have some serious side effects. I wonder if you could hypothesize with me or think through why those side effects might be present. And do you think it has to do with the fact that the people who are having their beta amyloid plaques, targeted and disrupted and maybe removed because of these treatments are actually then suffering bleeds and things because there's actually Lyme in the brain or there's something there that the plaques were working to wall off?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are first generation drugs. And I really hope that over time, the second and third generation versions of these, we can use them in combination with what we're doing. And we can get rid of the why the amyloid is being triggered in the first place. And then at the same time, get rid of some of those misfolded proteins and hopefully get the structure back. Now, why is the bleeding happening and then the swelling happening? Partially because amyloid can happen in and around the vasculature. And so if you were taking that plaque out, if we're taking that amyloid plaque out, then if it's associated with the vascular structure, then that's why you end up with the bleeding. And that happens, people have brain swelling or brain bleeding in about 38% of participants. That's happening. Not all of them are symptomatic or problematic, but some of them are, and it needs to be very closely monitored. So donanemab, the Eli Lilly drug, the most recent one that was approved by the FDA just in the last few weeks, that one, about 38% of participants experience one of those side effects, the brain swelling or brain bleeding or both.
Wow. That's a pretty steep cost for very little gain if you're trying to recover.
There's also quite a bit of financial cost, right? And time costs because it's the IV, I think it's once a month for donanemab, if I am remembering that correctly. I think for Leqembi or lecanemab, that it's every other week. But not only do you need to go get the IVs, but you've got to go get MRIs to make sure that you're being assessed and basically you're tracking and mitigating the risk of these side effects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's go back. Before we leave Lyme and go to the next category, I want to say one more thing. A lot of people with Lyme brain are sort of thinking, well, this is just my Lyme. Would you agree that it's just my Lyme, or is this something that people actually should get in the ring with? And are they at a higher risk of Alzheimer's disease or further dementia, even
Yeah,
if they're
I have
treating?
Yeah, I have patients who have had chronic Lyme for 20, 30 years, and they now have dementia, right? And we think that this is a big part of why. Now, having Lyme, right, so caregiving increases your risk of being diagnosed with dementia later in life by anywhere from 2.5 to 6x
Wow.
compared to people who aren't caregivers. Now, imagine Lyme. Like the reason caregiving increases your risk of developing dementia, I think it is because of the stress, right? It's the burden and the stress of caregiving for someone with dementia. You have sleep deprivation. You're not exercising optimally. You're not eating optimally. You are living this unpredictable life. You don't know when your spouse or your parent is going to pass away, or when if they're going to be better tomorrow, if they're going to have a good day or a bad day, or if they're going to lose their ability to do the next thing. And when I think about people who are struggling with Lyme, it's not all that different, right? You're sleep deprived, you're in chronic pain potentially, you're constantly chronically fatigued, you're often financially stressed. You might not be getting the movement that you would hope, if you were healthy and you weren't suffering with Lyme, you would be probably exercising more. So, and then also, just the unpredictability. Am I going to have a good day? Am I going to have a bad day? Am I going to be able to care for my children? Am I going to be able to go to work? All of that unpredictability that comes with suffering from a chronic complex illness, I think kind of puts us at risk for dementia the same way that caregiving kind of does. Very similar. There's like a parallel track there. And in addition, there is an infection in the system that can directly increase inflammation in the brain. So, Dr. Richard Horowitz, he has shown that there are patients with diagnosed dementia and Alzheimer's who he has treated for Lyme who have improved cognitively significantly. And there are these certain types of kind of atypical Alzheimer's or atypical dementias. And Dr. Bredesen is often like mold or Lyme, mold or Lyme. Make sure you're looking for mold and Lyme, because these atypical presentations, sometimes there's this one of these insidious, overlooked diseases that are perpetuating that.
So in your mind, is there a difference then between Alzheimer's that develops after 20 to 30 years of chronic Lyme versus dementia from Lyme? I mean, you can't really diagnose Alzheimer's until retroactively with a postmortem, brain biopsy, right, to look for plaques and tangles.
Actually, we have new testing. So just in the past couple of years, there's we can do ASL, so we can do imaging that does look for the components of Alzheimer's, and we can diagnose using imaging. And also the p-tau 217, that's another good one. We can look at amyloid ratios as well. Those can be more transient. They can come and go with different infections, like even COVID and colds and stuff. But the p-tau 217, which is basically looking at is the structure of the neuron being compromised, that can give us some directionality and tell us if somebody has Alzheimer's or is on their way towards an Alzheimer's associated with the tauopathies, certainly.
But I guess, so that's super interesting. I didn't know that. So thanks for sharing. But I'm curious about how it changes management. Like if someone has Lyme without the tau proteins, and someone has Lyme and 20 years of Lyme and dementia that's Alzheimer's, how does it change what you do?
Yeah, very little, right? So a lot of these, like the imaging and the p-tau and stuff, and a MoCA score, well, it doesn't exactly change what we do, but it tells us, are we going in the right direction, or do we need to do more digging? They
Mm.
say for somebody suffering with Lyme, and I'm sure you approach it the same way, but like Lyme might be one of the primary drivers, and it could be the smoking gun, but do they also have mercury? Do they also have mold toxicity? Are they also deficient in some essential micronutrient? Is there some stressor that we need to evaluate, or some PTSD that we need to think about? We want to treat the whole person. And so, to your point, if they have an amyloid positive versus just brain fog and maybe a dementia associated with Lyme that isn't manifesting as amyloid, would we treat them any differently? And the answer is no. That Lyme might lead to a Lewy body type dementia. And the only reason that would really change, the only way that would really change my management of that case with a patient is I would set their family up with maybe a little bit more caregiving sooner. and more help, because it can be more emotionally challenging when someone is experiencing like combative behaviors or hallucinations. And so if they have more of a Lewy body type presentation, we want the family to know that. We want them to be prepared for that. But ultimately, how we treat in terms of diet and exercise and supplements and what are we trying to accomplish, it's the same.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering about, and I'm thinking about people listening and wondering whether they are kind of like ruling themselves in as someone who needs to keep listening and maybe read your book, or saying like, you know what, mischief managed, I don't have Lyme, no one in my family, I don't have the genetics. Let's talk about the genetics, for example. Like, a lot of people are getting the APO E4 and the testing to see if they're ApoE4. And what are your thoughts about whether it matters for them to know that, and whether people need to still look at this information even if they're not genetically inclined?
Yeah, so 12, 15 years ago when I was in training, so I remember patients being like, well, I don't want to know because that'll just give me an anxiety. I'll stay up at night and there's nothing I can do about it anyways. That has entirely changed. Now, if you know in your 20s that you're ApoE4 positive, you can you start now. We start preventing dementia now. We actually see that people who are ApoE3/4 or 4/4 positive, their brain is already working differently and has less cognitive capacity in their 20s compared to those who don't have ApoE. And so
Wow.
we can get way ahead of this, and it makes more sense to put more effort in if we have this. If we're ApoE4 positive. So just for everybody's like kind of just general information, worldwide population has about a 13% chance of being diagnosed with dementia throughout their lifetime. When you have one copy of ApoE4, so you have two copies of ApoE4, one's from mom, one's from dad. There's three different possibilities, a 2, a 3, or a 4. And so if you get one copy of 4 from mom or dad, and maybe you have a 2 or a 3, your risk goes up to 30%. So it goes from 13% to 30%. Now, if you have two copies of ApoE4, one from mom and one from dad, now your risk is well over 50%. And there was a recent Nature paper that basically suggested that it was inevitable that you would eventually get Alzheimer's if you had an ApoE4/4. So if I'm a parent of a kid and I have one or two copies of ApoE4 and I know that I might be passing that on to my child, ultimately, like maybe wait till they're 18 or they can decide on their own if they want to know their genetics. But I would want to know because I would want to arm them with that information. Hey, get this book sooner. Dr. Medicine calls it, my mentor calls it a cognoscopy. Just like we get a colonoscopy, if we know we have family history, we maybe get it a little bit sooner. We want to be looking so that we can address our risk factors, so that we can get ahead of it, so we can get early interventions going. We want to take a look and know. And so doing the cognoscopy means doing that full workup to understand about toxins, nutrients, stressors, structure, signaling, infections. We want to do that in our 20s and 30s if we're ApoE4 positive. If we're not, maybe we wait until our 40s or 50s. But we want to have, it's empowering. In my mind, it's really empowering to know that we have this potential risk.
Right. Well, because you have a pathway out of it. You have a different train to put people on. So let me just get this out of the way, because this was a question that came up from 3 different people in my audience. Is there ever a case in which aging and forgetfulness are normal? Like, is there a normal forgetfulness that happens as you get older?
No. There's a really interesting researcher, her name's Becca Levy, and she wrote a book called Breaking the Age Code. And what she showed, if you've ever heard that happy people live 7.5 years longer, or optimistic people live 7.5 years longer, Becca Levy is the one who published that research. She's at Yale. She's also looked at a lot of other things associated with aging, including comparing different societies and basically how these ApoE genetics play out. So people who are ApoE4 positive, but are in a community that reveres their elders. So this includes like Asian communities and also the American Deaf community. So it's not just about Asian genetics, but Chinese and Japanese people who are like live in community where they revere the elders, the wisdom of the elders, and elders are treated very well. And also in the American Deaf community, that you see that play out as well. What she sees in all of those communities is that the ApoE4 genetics disappear in terms of risk, and that people actually are cognitively sharper as they age, not more forgetful.
Wow.
A lot of what's happening is because our society values youth and neglects our elders and doesn't value them. And so there's ageism that basically plays a role in how we behave. It also means, like, when we can write it off and say, oh, forgetfulness is normal in aging, we don't do anything about it. Whereas if we're in our 20s and 30s, we go, oh my God, like, I'm not remembering, I better get more sleep, or I better eat better, or I should work on that somehow. But when we're older and we decide to just write it off as normal, we don't do anything about it, nothing gets better.
Okay, so I'm really eager to jump into all the ways in which things get better. But before we do, I have one last question from my audience. I think because people are trying to sort themselves, they're trying to figure out, what do I pay attention to? Is it worthwhile to really go down this path of thinking there's hope around these brain glitches that I've experienced in myself or others? And I'm hopeful that by the end of this, everyone will believe that, if you have a brain and you're listening, this matters, right? But the final question is there ever a point at which it's too late? Like, there's just no going back because someone is so severely cognitively compromised?
Okay, I'm sorry if I cry, but this, like, comes up all the time, and I usually do. I have learned the hard way to not tell people there's no hope, because I have watched people prove me wrong over and over and over again. So there was a woman who wanted to move into Marama. Actually, her power of attorney, the person responsible for her, wanted her to move into Marama right when we opened. So this was December 2019. She's calling me and like, hey, can I get my friend in? I really want her there, but she has a MoCA of 0. So she's the furthest progressed on this scale of cognitive function. She's nonverbal. And she's like, I really want her there. I know that this is the best place for her. And I was like, oh no, I don't think that we can help her. You've been doing all the Bredesen work at home. She's got all the care and support she needs. I'm afraid that if we move her in, we're not going to have good statistics, right? She's not going to get better. It's going to look like our program doesn't work. I want to get people who are earlier on in the spectrum. So then COVID hits, right? And so everything gets turned upside down. All of a sudden, as we're coming out of COVID, we do have space, and like the vaccines are coming on board, and we're starting to fill up. And so her friend calls again and says, hey, would you reconsider? I really think that this is the very best place for her and the only hope for my friend. And so, she convinces me, she's very persistent, and she moves in. And lo and behold, she got better. She didn't go back to work. It wasn't perfect, but she started speaking in complete sentences, telling us when she was hot and when she was cold and what felt good and when she was hungry. And she read someone's name tag and was connecting with people, and the whole community was rallied behind her, watching her get better. It was incredible. I mean, Kristin, like, you cannot make this stuff up. There are so many people who I've written off and thought we couldn't help, and then they've turned around and showed me, like, oh yes, you can.
Wow.
Now,
Wow.
that being said, it's way easier earlier on. Prevention is so much less expensive, so much less work. It's so much less of a chore. You don't need other people to do it for you. You can do it for yourself at that stage. The earlier the younger people are, the earlier they are in the disease process, the quicker, fastest, more like better results we see. And there are people who don't get better. Don't get me wrong. Like, there are people, this is not 100%. We can't guarantee it for anyone. But most of the time, regardless of where you are on the spectrum of cognitive decline, putting these interventions to work, diving in fully, doing as much of it as you can, we see improvement.
Amazing. Well, I want to encourage people right now, because I think probably at this moment, everyone listening is like, okay, I'm in. I want to know how to prevent cognitive decline or reverse the cognitive decline I see in myself or others. And I just want to put one more plug in for this book. It is a comprehensive manual, so beautifully written. And actually, at the end of every chapter, there's action steps for, like, they're baby steps, right? Like, it's, if you do one thing, do this. And if you can't do it to this degree, do it to this degree. And if you can't do it to this degree, do it to this degree. You'll still see results with the smallest effort in each of these domains. And I just love that about your book and the way in which you teach this, because it makes it accessible. It makes it doable and sustainable for people. So let's get into some of the methods. What's the magic secret sauce that goes on at Marama that's getting these great results?
Yeah, so especially Marama, I think that because this is all of the really foundational lifestyle pieces. So I think of four pillars there. One, an organic ketogenic lifestyle, an organic ketogenic diet. And this can be tasty. It is not low calorie. It is nutrient dense. It doesn't hopefully feel restrictive. It can in those first few days. Like when I go into ketosis, I have had a day where I think only about donuts, and like I haven't eaten donuts in 15 years, but like we crave carbs, we're addicted to them. And so as you're weaning off of them, there can be a little hump to get over. But when you're in ketosis, typically we feel more energetic, mood stabilizes, we get off those sugar, spikes and drops, we sleep better, people's incontinence goes away. I mean, it's really incredible what we see happen when we shift into an organic ketogenic diet. Now, this is not a bacon and cheese diet. This is very much vegetable heavy, lots of brassica veggies, lots of like detox. So we're getting detox support, tons of fiber, lots and lots and lots of veggies. My opinion is that if it makes it easier to get metabolically into ketosis and you tolerate dairy, you tolerate meat, then I am an advocate for animal protein on this diet, but mostly A2 dairy, so sheep and goat, and A2, if you're going to do cow, A2 organic, grass-fed, the cleanest animal products you can possibly find, wild salmon, sardines, anchovies, those really good high quality cold water fish. And then if you're going to do beef or any red meat, 100% grass-fed. I like the heirloom, organic chicken and turkey and all that stuff. And you can have I try not to limit that for people because I want people to feel satisfied. But what we do is I'm an advocate of switching on and off the ketogenic diet. So get into ketosis for 3 to 6 months if you have any cognitive impairment. It's an exceptionally brain healing diet. I don't think that there's a better one. Get all of those good nutrients in, get the carbohydrates out, flip that metabolic switch. And then when you come out of ketosis, go towards plant-based. Go, lots of fiber, but if you tolerate them, put in the lentils, put in the squash, put in the seasonal fruits, put in the things that you've been, like the carrots and the beets that will raise your blood sugar, mix it up, but back off of the animal protein so that you kind of get the best of both worlds. And from a practical perspective, like people want to go on trips and they want to go to weddings and celebrations and birthdays and stuff. And so don't be so hard on yourself. You can come out of ketosis, just be mindful to get back into it. And then that's where I think we see people basically do best if they do that. Overarching message around diet, stop the processed foods. I think that is what's responsible. These highly palatable, highly profitable, highly processed foods are driving a lot of the complex chronic disease that we see with aging. So get rid of those, eat whole foods, what's coming from the ground, coming from the plant, coming straight from the animal, what you would cook in your kitchen. Avoid, get out the maltodextrin and the guar gum and the carrageenan, all that stuff should be, we don't eat that in our house, right? So that I think is like diet does more heavy lifting than any other intervention, I think. That's where we see the biggest shifts the fastest. Now, if you can't go keto tomorrow, just reduce your carbohydrates, just reduce your processed food, just start inching in this direction. We want it to feel accessible. Now, the most recent study on dementia, most recent lifestyle intervention that was published on dementia was in June of 2024, just very recently, by Dr. Dean Ornish. He published a 5-month intervention and he used a vegan diet. And it was the first randomized controlled trial to show that in the control group, where they did this lifestyle intervention, there was an improvement in cognitive function in people with mild cognitive impairment or early dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. So really, really, really exciting. In our trial, we used an organic ketogenic diet. In their trial, they used a vegan diet. So you can do both and expect some improvement in cognition. So that's diet. Do you want to keep going?
Keep going. Keep it coming. This is awesome.
So exercise, blood flow to the brain, right? We need to get enough blood flow to the brain. And so there's a few different types of exercise that, general exercise recommendations, you'll see in the literature, 150 to 300 minutes per week. Now, if you're struggling with Lyme and you have chronic fatigue, and especially that post-exertional malaise, There's things that you can do that to kind of simulate exercise. So things like the chi machine, like anything that get vibe plate, chi machine, also sauna therapy, where you just are getting circulation going, but without hopefully tipping the scales so that you're experiencing the post-exertional malaise. If you only have, like, if you're allocating energy and time and you have, say, 10 minutes a day where you can go for a walk, exercise cognitively at the same time as physically. Now, this is going to make it a little bit more demanding, but what we call this is dual task exercise. So DUAL. And they've done a lot of this research up at the Pacific Neuroscience Institute. My friend Ryan Glatt, who's up there, is publishing around this. And essentially, when we engage the brain at the same time as the body, we see better outcomes in cognition than either of them alone. So if you're doing Lumosity, online, or Brain HQ, or some of these brain games online, or you're just going and exercising and just listening to music and kind of checking out, well, if you combine those two things, you actually get more benefit. So it's a way to be more efficient about this exercise routine. So as simple as walking and talking, that counts as dual task exercise. Going to classes where you're cued by an instructor and you have to keep up, that counts as dual task exercise. I love this pickleball craze, right? Because there's social interaction, you're often outside, there's hand-eye coordination, there's of course like you're physically engaged, it's socially engaging. So anything where you can kind of check multiple boxes, it's much more efficient. But when you can engage in multiple ways, particularly cognitively, like you have to keep up in your brain, plus you're engaging physically, that combination is pretty magic. And a lot of people haven't thought about that or heard about it. And so, especially if you're allocating this small amount of energy that you have, and you really have to be efficient, right, about how you do it, I think that's one of the best ways to help promote blood flow to the brain.
And what is the smallest unit of exercise that counts? Some people are like, for them, a small amount is an hour a day. For others, a small amount is getting up and going to the bathroom.
Oh my gosh, taking a shower, right? Or that's actually a huge amount. I've seen many patients with Lyme and co-infections and mold that are allocating at that level. You have to do what works for you. And our hope is that this is dynamic, right? As you're on that healing path, that shower as exercise becomes, I can shower every day instead of only being able to shower twice a week. And now I can start walking to the mailbox, and now I can start walking down the street for 10 minutes, and now I can start walking for 30 minutes. And that as you get better, and right, there's an order of operations here, right? I wouldn't suggest anybody exercise to the point of malaise, but do what you can. And if you are exercising, if you have that ability to exercise, combine it with cognitive engagement.
Love it. Okay. So diet, exercise, these are like the usual suspects, right? Like what else is on the list? What else on the 4 pillars?
Yeah. So the engagement, cognitive engagement, 4 pillars at Marama are diet, exercise and activities, environment, and then the caregiving. So around the caregiving, that's like a simple, quick one. It's surrounding yourself with people who expect you to get better.
Mm.
You interact with people, just like Becca Levy's work, right? If you have an older person who's going to a physical therapist and they're 95, the PT goes, you're not going to get that much better. So why would I engage that much? Why would I work that hard? Why would I give you things that are going to challenge you? I'm just going to get you to this point, and then I'm expecting you're going to die, right? Now, if we show up in a lot of those relationships where people are like, why would I try that hard? I'm, like with even our spouse or our kids or our family unit, whoever's around us, it really is, we have this like responsibility. Make sure this is why the Lyme community, I think, is so important to each other, right? We need stories of hope. We need to be in this mindset that we are getting better, that there is a path for us to get better. Otherwise, we start treating ourselves differently. We start giving up. And so we have seen that caregivers who come, because Marama, this is the only place in the world where we're doing this, right? So caregivers who had experience in caregiving, they had to be retrained to expect their residents to get better, because otherwise they were treating them differently. Really fascinating. Also, it's just the management of all of the pieces, right? So our caregivers there and at home for people struggling with Lyme or with cognitive decline, managing, I mean, I laugh when I say this, and I think a lot of people will relate, but it's like the pill boxes, all of the supplements, and when do I take them? And are they with food? Are they not with food? Are they in the morning? Are they at night? Like, what is this for? What pharmacy did this one come from? Where do I need to get the refill from? That can feel like a full-time job, right? And so having someone help you manage that, or making sure that you schedule time, like if it's Sunday afternoon every other week, you put 4 hours aside. So, or maybe it's Monday so that the pharmacies are open, right? But you think through and put it on your calendar or someone else's calendar to set aside the time to make sure that that's well managed. Because if you're only taking things 50% of the time, we only really expect you to get 50% better. But if we can really put everything that the doctor said to do into action as close to 100% of the time and the way it's meant to be taken as possible, we expect better outcomes. So that's just part of that, like caregiving. I know this is so simple and so like, duh, but it's also one of those things that I say and people are like, oh, okay. Now I need to take that seriously and actually set aside the time to do it. And now it starts happening and they're like, oh, now I'm sleeping better. Now I have more energy. Um, so the caregiving, that's kind of a quick one. We talked about diet, exercise, of course, that physical engagement, and then environment. So exercise and activities is kind of go together, making sure you have a purpose and meaning, whether it's volunteering, creative activities, music, it needs to be fun. Where is the fun and recreation in your life? And if that is missing, it's doctor's orders. Figure it out, find a way to have fun, find a way to create purpose and meaning. If it's a pet, if it's, a child, whatever, if it's writing, whatever it means for you, if it's maybe going back to an old hobby or starting a new one that you always dreamed of. If we don't have that thing that we're looking forward to, why, like, life becomes not worth living. And again, we behave differently when we're not excited about something. Maybe one of the things that comes up at Marama is we have this stud of a physical therapist, and when he shows up, all the ladies are like jumping too, right? They're like, all right, what are we doing with Tim today? And it's one of those ways that we can just sort of like, I want to say like manipulate ourselves, but we can basically create habits, or we can create behavior change when we understand our motivations. And if we know that we're going to perform for a good-looking person, then get a good-looking person showing up and perform for them, right? If that's going to get us up and out of our chairs, then figure it out. Get a hot trainer. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. So exercise and activity kind of go together, and then the environment. So creating a non-toxic and healing environment. And we can go, I'm wondering, like, do you guys already talk about this in your coaching programs and in your,
I
yeah.
mean, we talk about Lyme, we talk about mold, we talk about how important it is to not be using the regular shampoos and the deodorants and all the stuff that kind of creates toxicity, and the people, right? Like, how to surround yourself with a healing team that not only believes you can heal, but loves you, cares about you.
Yeah, like the kitchen is a place where a lot of this comes up. Just getting plastic out of the kitchen completely, no nonstick. We only cook with cast iron, stainless, glass, and then even ceramics, making sure that there's not lead potentially in the glazes. Some of the stuff that comes from China and from India and Mexico will have lead in the glazes. So you want to just be aware of course, everything you're consuming organic as much as possible in the kitchen, but then really getting like the plastic, the nonstick, that kind of thing out of the kitchen. The
So
seed oil.
as I'm listening to this and imagining Marama and just how beautifully and intentionally it has been created for optimization of whoever's there, I want to come move in. So I'm starting to think about, like, what are the criteria for admission? Like, do you require people to be at a certain MOCA score? I'm guessing no, because of the story you just told about the woman who came during COVID. But is there like also a certain level of willingness to participate? A lot of folks with dementia start to get cranky and resistant and really dig their heels in. What's required?
Yeah, there is that Venn diagram of like they've got to want it. And so that can be really tricky, especially for people who are not aware. I don't characterize this as denial anymore. I don't think that people are in denial of their cognitive decline. I think they lose the ability to have the self-awareness because of the way it's affecting their brain. That's more, I don't think people are disingenuous and that like, oh no, this is normal. No, I'm not forgetting. I think they just really are lack that part of their brain. And so it's not for everyone. This whole approach is not for everyone. And even I'm sure you've seen in the Lyme community, if you are waiting for an easy pill or an easy IV to make this go away next week, that is not what I have for you. I am so sorry. I wish I did. If I did, I would be screaming it from the rooftops. I would be the first person to tell you. It's just not what's available. It's not how we get healing, and it takes work. And so we do need people that are going to show up and engage and not bring down everybody else, but really contribute to the dynamic and the fun that everybody's having, right? Celebrate and laugh and play along the way. So in some of what happens, we only have people move in usually one at a time. The quickest we'll move people in is one per week, but we try to stagger them because there's detox from TV, there's detox from sugar that happens. Sometimes there's detox from alcohol that's happening. And in that process, it can be uncomfortable as they're getting settled for the first 4 to 5 weeks. And so usually on the other end of that, there's a lightening and things are looking up, but we don't want to have 2, 3, 4 people going through that all at the same time because it can kind of spiral.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have limited capacity, and like you said, you're the only one doing this in the country right now. Is there hope for more of these centers springing up, and for Pennsylvania even, which is my neck of the woods?
Well, please, if you know someone in Pennsylvania that has a elderly living facility or community, we are looking to partner with people all over the country and in fact, all over the world. We get inquiries all the time. And so we're in conversations with people in Virginia and Michigan and Hawaii and California, and we already have a location in Kansas set up. So what we're trying to do is take this concept, take everything that we've learned and basically put it into existing senior living communities so that we can expand access to as many people as possible, as fast as possible.
Amazing. I'm so excited. That just gave me goosebumps. I feel like this is the time, right? This is what's needed. These issues are on the rise. They're not going to get any better unless we actually embrace this paradigm. I think this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm wanting to sort of end with some next steps people could take. We talked about the book. There's Marama on one extreme, the book on the other, which is accessible to all. Is there like a middle ground for people who aren't ready to pick up and move or spend the money to come live inpatient or in residence, to work with you, to work with your team to get some of this coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the clinical care that happens in San Diego. If you're in California, we can establish you as a patient, happy to do all the labs, all the testing, figure out if there's a smoking gun there. And then for people who, that doesn't feel accessible, we do online coaching programs, group cohorts where you create community. We get you the support you need to implement each of these things and go at a pace that feels doable. Again, that's the most important part. It doesn't work if you don't do it. And so how do we implement this? How do we take it a step at a time? And how do you get your questions answered pretty quickly so that you can get up over any hurdles that you run into?
And your publication that came out recently, that was based on Solcere, but do you have evidence or do you have data from the group coaching programs to see how well those are working for people?
Oh, that's such a great question. We should be collecting that kind of data. We haven't been. I mean, we hear tons of reports of people like, my wife is better, I'm better, my MoCA score is doing this and that. And it's all very hopeful. But we haven't been actively collecting data. But thank you for that nudge. We definitely should be.
Awesome. Is there anything else you would like to share that we haven't talked about yet or emphasize for this community of people listening who are, all of them have brains, working or not, and are benefiting from this? What else haven't we talked about?
Well, I think the most important message is that there's hope. There is so much reason for hope. Again, there's been 3 studies published in the last 3 years that show that this type of intervention improves cognitive function in people with mild cognitive impairment or even early Alzheimer's. So I don't want anyone to feel that burden of there's nothing I can do. That is just not the case anymore. There's a ton of room for hope here, lots of reason for it. And it's just a matter of getting started.
Oh, amazing. So I love to end there. And thank you again. We'll put all the links to all the different avenues people can learn more about you in our show notes. Thank you so much, Dr. Heather Sandison, for all that you're doing.
Oh, Kristin, it's been absolutely a privilege to be here. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healing Grove podcast. If you liked it, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to deepen your experience further, consider grabbing a copy of the Healing Grove Playbook. With journal prompts for this podcast and 41 others, it's the perfect place to record your learnings, keep track of the tools you explore, and reflect on your own experience. Finally, it's important to mention that even though I am a doctor, nothing you hear on this podcast, whether from myself or my guests, constitutes medical advice. Any intervention you try should always be discussed with and supervised by a trusted member of your own healing team. Thanks for listening, and see you next time in the Healing Grove.